History remembers kings as conquerors, lawgivers, and builders of empires. Queens, however, were often remembered for who they married, who they birthed, or in some cases whether they were mad. One of the most haunting examples of this is Joanna of Castile. She inherited not one crown, but two, and through her bloodline gave rise to the greatest empire in Europe. Yet her legacy was stolen, rewritten as the tale of a queen who lost her mind. To some, she was Joanna the Mad. To others, she was a tragic woman, trapped by betrayal, locked away by her own family, and stripped of power. But was she truly insane, or was she the victim of political convenience? This is the life of Joanna of Castile, the queen who lost everything but her title and whose story still echoes across history. Joanna of Castile was born in 1479 in the city of Toledo, the heart of her mother's kingdom. She was the third child of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, two monarchs whose marriage reshaped the map of Spain. By uniting their realms, they became known as the Catholic monarchs, celebrated for bringing Spain into the dawn of empire. They were ambitious, ruthless, and deeply devout, and their children were raised in that mold. From her earliest days, Joanna was not expected to rule. Her older brother Juan was heir to both kingdoms, and her sister Isabella was married to secure an alliance with Portugal. Joanna, meanwhile, was destined for a different kind of service, marriage into another European dynasty to strengthen ties abroad. Her life, like so many princesses of her age, was not her own. She was a pawn in the high-stakes chessboard of dynastic politics. Yet Joanna stood out. She was given a humanist education, learning Latin, law, theology, and even philosophy at a level unusual for a royal daughter. She was said to be intelligent, serious, and unusually pious, sometimes to the point of severity. Court observers noted that she was deeply introspective, prone to long silences and sudden bursts of passion. Some would later call these traits signs of melancholy or instability, but at the time they were simply considered aspects of a complex personality. The Spain Joanna was born into was not a peaceful land. Her parents were still completing the Reconquista, the long struggle to take back Iberia from Muslim rule. They were also negotiating alliances with powerful kingdoms like France, Portugal, and the Holy Roman Empire. Every child in their household was viewed as a political asset, and Joanna was no exception. From her earliest days, she was shaped not as an individual, but as a tool in the grand chess game of dynastic politics. In 1496, at the age of 17, Joanna was married to Philip of Habsburg, known as Philip the Handsome. It was a union of immense political importance. The Habsburg family controlled Austria and the Low Countries and would soon dominate much of Europe. By joining Spain to this dynasty, the Catholic monarchs secured alliances that reached far beyond the Iberian Peninsula. Joanna traveled north to Flanders for the wedding, and at first the marriage seemed to burn with passion. Accounts describe Joanna as falling deeply in love with Philip. For a young woman raised in the rigid environment of Spain, his charm and good looks may have been overwhelming. But Philip was not a faithful husband. He was a man of indulgence, surrounding himself with courtiers, mistresses, and flattery. This imbalance set their marriage on a collision course. Joanna's love for Philip turned to jealousy, and her jealousy turned to eruptions of anger. Reports circulated that she lashed out at his mistresses and that her devotion to him bordered on obsession. Her behavior was scrutinized at every turn, and rumors of instability began to follow her. But it is important to remember, in the 16th century, strong emotions in women were often described as madness. What we might see today as grief, passion, or depression was framed by her contemporaries as evidence of insanity. Still, the image of Joanna as a woman consumed by love and rage was beginning to take root. Politically, however, her position was becoming more important than ever. Tragedy struck her family in quick succession. Her brother Juan, the male heir, died young. Her sister Isabella also died, leaving no surviving claim to the Castilian throne. Suddenly, Joanna, the third child never meant to rule, was next in line to inherit one of the most powerful crowns in Europe. When Queen Isabella of Castile died in 1504, Joanna inherited her mother's crown. On paper, she was now Queen of Castile in her own right, but in practice, her authority was contested from the very beginning. Philip saw himself as king and sought to rule directly, sidelining his wife. Joanna's father Ferdinand also resisted the idea of her ruling independently, fearing that Philip's influence would threaten Aragon. Each man claimed that Joanna was unfit to govern, pointing to her emotional outbursts as evidence of her supposed madness. This was the beginning of a lifelong pattern. Whenever Joanna's rule might threaten a powerful man around her, accusations of insanity were brought forward. Was she truly incapable, or was this simply a convenient excuse? Caught in the middle, Joanna was queen in name, but a pawn in the rivalry between her husband and her father. Her kingdom became the prize in a struggle between two ambitious men, and her reputation was the weapon used to undermine her. In 1506, Philip suddenly died in the city of Burgos. He was only 28 years old. Some whispered that he had been poisoned. Others believed he succumbed to disease, possibly typhoid fever. Whatever the cause, his death shattered Joanna. The most infamous part of her story begins here. According to accounts, Joanna refused to part with his body. She is said to have travelled with his coffin across Castile, opening it to gaze at him, and even speaking to him as if he were still alive. Monks and courtiers spread tales of her obsession, claiming she slept beside his corpse or jealously guarded it against imagined rivals. These stories cemented her image as a woman unhinged by grief. But historians today debate how much of this was true. Was Joanna truly so consumed by loss, or were these tales exaggerated by those eager to discredit her? Whatever the truth, Philip's death left her vulnerable. With her husband gone, her father Ferdinand quickly reasserted control over Castile, declaring that Joanna was unfit to rule. Once again, the narrative of her madness served as a convenient justification to strip her of power. After Philip's death, Joanna was queen only in title. Her father ruled Castile in her name, while she was increasingly isolated. When Ferdinand himself died in 1516, the crown passed not to Joanna, but to her son Charles, known to history as Charles I of Spain and Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire. Charles had little interest in sharing power with his mother. Instead, he followed his grandfather's example and declared her incapable of ruling. To secure his control, he confined her in the royal palace of Tordesillas. There she remained for nearly half a century. Guards and priests monitored her every move. She was permitted little contact with the outside world. Some accounts describe her resisting confinement, shouting, and even resorting to violence. Others say she sank into silence, refusing to eat or participate in religious life. To her jailers, this was further proof of her madness, but it is just as likely that Joanna was responding as anyone might to decades of forced isolation and betrayal. She had been stripped of her freedom, her power, and even her dignity. The great debate surrounding Joanna's life is whether she was truly insane or whether she was the victim of political betrayal. There is no question that she experienced grief, jealousy, and despair. She may have suffered from depression or even a more severe mental illness. But it is equally true that her father and son had every reason to portray her as unfit. For Ferdinand, labeling Joanna as mad allowed him to govern Castile in her place. For Charles, it secured his control over both Spain and the vast Habsburg Empire. In other words, the diagnosis of madness served political purposes. It allowed powerful men to silence a woman whose legitimacy threatened their ambitions. Whether Joanna was unstable or not, the result was the same. She was kept in confinement for most of her life, her legacy reduced to a cruel nickname. Joanna spent nearly half a century locked away. Visitors to Tordesillas described her as frail, often unkempt, sometimes refusing to bathe or change her clothes. She resisted the priests who tried to control her spiritual life, at times refusing confession or mass. To some, these were signs of stubbornness, even heresy. To others, they were small acts of defiance from a woman who had been denied every other freedom. Her daughter, Catherine, lived with her for many years, offering some comfort. But her son Charles rarely visited, despite ruling in her name. For the people of Spain, Joanna became a distant, almost mythical figure, the queen who lived but did not rule. She died in 1555 at the age of 75, having spent most of her life as a prisoner in her own kingdom. Joanna of Castile's life is both tragic and revealing. She was born into extraordinary power, yet denied the chance to use it. She was the daughter of the monarchs who built Spain, the wife of a powerful Habsburg prince, and the mother of an emperor who ruled the largest empire Europe had ever seen. And yet, her story was rewritten as that of a mad woman. Was she truly unstable, or was she the victim of betrayal, grief, and confinement? The answer may never be known, but what is clear is that her so-called madness was weaponized against her, ensuring she would never sit securely on the throne she inherited. Her legacy is a warning of how easily history can silence those who lose, and especially women whose power threatens the men around them. Behind the legend of the Mad Queen was a woman of intelligence, passion, and resilience, whose tragedy was not madness alone, but the way it was used to erase her. Joanna of Castile remains one of history's most haunting queens. To some, she was a ruler undone by her own mind. To others, she was a prisoner of politics, betrayed by those closest to her. In the end, her legacy is not only her tragic life, but the empire she passed on, an empire that reshaped Europe and the New World. If you enjoyed this story and want to uncover more shocking tales of queens who defied expectations or fell to betrayal, make sure you subscribe. There are countless hidden stories of power, scandal, and survival waiting to be told, and you won't want to miss them.